Good afternoon and welcome to Saturday Sesh. My name is Trey Rickling, the founder and director of Academy of Cannabis Science, and we're glad to have you here for Saturday Sesh. This is the event where we come together once a month to talk to industry professionals about what they're passionate about and why we likewise should consider that sharing that passion. And we're really happy to have you today as we are hosting Tahira Rehmatullah, the co-author of Waiting to Inhale, Cannabis Legalization and the Fight for Racial Justice. And not just that, Tahira has been involved for years in the industry and is also a board member of Last Prisoner Project and a founder of a company herself. So Tahira, I know I gave your intro kind of short shift there, short introduction, but could you do that a little better justice and welcome?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for everybody joining today. So I guess a little more detail in my introduction. I've been in the cannabis industry for about 10 years. I joined in 2014 and actually started in Seattle. But very familiar with the landscape there. And actually, Uncle Ike's was the first legal dispensary I ever went to. I know that's familiar to some of you who are tuned in. When I started off, I was working for a private equity firm that was entirely focused on cannabis, and my interest in the space came because my more through a family situation that's kind of sparked my interest. I know we'll get into more of that in a bit, but my experience has been all over the industry, starting on the investment side, and then I was very quickly put into a position to create a brand that was in partnership with Bob Marley's family estate. And at that time, if you think about 2014, it was still very early for people to think about having prepackaged cannabis that was branded in this certain way. And I remember having to really argue with people, especially in California, because they didn't think that that would ever take off, that was not how people were used to consuming cannabis or purchasing it. And, look where we are now, where that is the lay of the land and packaging is all the rage on everything. So from there, I spent time working with other brands. I helped them get to market in early days, 2016, 2017, and then stepped more back into the investment side, worked a lot with investing in ancillary businesses. So, data platforms, technology solutions, brands that were more on the licensing side, was able to do what is called a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company. It was actually it was the first one listed in the US. We took a business called MJ Freeway public on the NASDAQ. And then since then, have done kind of a mix of investing and operating. I'm based now in New York and have been very actively watching the market here. So for any of you who are familiar, know that it's a wild ride for the legalization process and what's continuing to happen. I have a small portfolio of investments with my partner, and then we also have a brand called Commons, which is right now it's all CBD based products, and the idea around that was really trying to democratize access to health and wellness products that are coming out of the cannabinoid space, and particularly with aging populations or those who have less access and education around it, to be able to utilize a peer-to-peer model so people could actually share more information. There's still a lot of nervousness around going into stores, not really know what you're getting and not really know how to use it. And so we wanted to really attach real people, to being able to explain, this is how it worked for me, this is how it could potentially work for you. And some of that also has to do with managing pets, kind of people who are managing other people in their life, aging family members. So that's been a really interesting process to just learn more. And then somewhere in that, I met my co-author Akwasi, and we wrote a book because of all the stuff that we were seeing, both on the business side and in the social equity and policy side. So that brings us to today.
That's exciting. And we know, gosh, 10 years in cannabis, that's as we say dog years. Like that represents a
Yeah.
lot more years than 10, right? Because we know it's ever changing. You can't, like we talk to our students, we're not going to be able to let rest on our laurels any more than a tech industry professional or a doctor. The information is going to keep changing and the industry is going to keep changing. And I'm sure you've seen a tremendous amount of that. Before we get to that, could you talk to us a little bit about how you got into this industry? Because I think it was a text that kind of upended your life, but maybe in a positive way.
Yes. So when I was in business school, 2013, I was in my second year, and I got a text from my mother, of all people, texting me and my younger sister, and all she said was, "Do you know where to get marijuana?" And my younger sister immediately called me and she said, "Do you think this is a test?" Because my parents were not people who were anywhere near accepting cannabis or had even, ever had conversations with us about it. So it was very surprising to get that message. It turned out that my mother was doing a ton of research because my grandfather, her father, was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in early 2013. And so she was looking for all the treatments, all the different remedies. And in her late night Google searches, would keep coming across cannabis. And she knew nothing about it. I mean, not even that it was completely illegal. I grew up in Ohio. My parents are still there. So especially for a state like that at that time, um, but then as she was reading more, she was just kind of like, how come I can't access this if it is so beneficial for people who, especially for the anecdotes that are out there about people who are going through cancer treatment. And so to her, it was kind of just like a simple question, like, do you know where to get this? Like, we know where to get it, but I don't know if you want to go there. And I'm not having some random person show up at your door with a baggie for my, 80 something year old grandfather who's going through chemotherapy. And so that really just started a research project for me. I was pretty fascinated by it. Knew as someone who grew up in small town Ohio, I knew people who grew it, people who consumed it, consumed it myself as a high schooler, but it wasn't something that had really been a part of my life. And I didn't realize actually what was happening at that time, with Colorado legalizing, with Washington being early, and the movements that were happening at that time. So I was pretty fascinated by it. And similar to my mother, was surprised that there was such a disconnect, that clearly there's evidence on how beneficial this is. There have been decades of evidence around it. It was legal many, many decades ago. So what happened? And then what became a research project for me eventually turned into a job, which I was like, this could either be a career, depending on where this industry goes, or it could be a really interesting opportunity to be at least understand more firsthand. And obviously, 10 years later, I'm still here, so have stuck with it. But it was definitely an interesting introduction to it that I was not expecting. And I don't think my mother was expecting that either. Like, anytime I give her
Right.
credit where I'm like, thanks to you, mom, I'm in the cannabis industry. And she's like, I'm not taking credit for this.
That's not on me. So,
Yeah, she's like, that's not on me. This is you.
and not only did you write a book, but this, if you all get a chance, I don't know if you can, yeah, there you can see, pick up this book. It is rich, it is dense, it's got not just statistics, it's written in a way that tells stories. It's very accessible. Um, you tell the story about Evelyn LaChapelle, a friend of ours, who's also been on Saturday Sesh, and you tell a number of stories that really personalize the uh, the biggest crime, which is how we've treated people in the war on drugs, particularly around cannabis. So I imagine you've got a tremendous amount of stats and data and stories. But when you just have a little bit of time with somebody, do you have an elevator speech? Is there something that stands out? You're like, this is what I typically like people to know if I have just a little bit of time with them. Is there an elevator speech or something, a data point that you like to hold up to folks to make sure that they know?
Particularly about the cannabis industry.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I will often repeat to people is that the cannabis industry is the only industry that I've experienced that touches everything. That it's medicine, it's a consumer product, it's technology, it is healthcare. It is so broad and deep that there's so much to discover and really pursue. And when you start positioning it that way to people, I think the light bulbs start going off on the reality of how much this plant really impacts and touches. And then you start getting into the things around criminal justice reform, social equity. It's so broad and so deep. And I think that's what has allowed me to continue to stay fascinated for as long and hard as these past 10 years have been, and being in this roller coaster of an industry. At the same time, there's still so much to uncover. And I think that that is something really unique about the space, that people, they just don't think about that on at first blush.
For sure. And Part of that is the social equity piece, right? Is trying to undo years and years of harm that the war on drugs has had, not just to individuals and families, but generations of folks. Um, we know as this rolls out, the state to state, some states are better than others. New York,
Hmm.
more progressive than many. Still, there's a lot of posturing, value signaling that goes on around equity, and typically a lot less effort or a lot less tangibles. It's often like it comes across as the afterthought rather than the first thing we need to take care of in a state where this is rolling out. What are some questions you hope people are asking when it comes to efforts to make cannabis a more equitable space with ownership, access, etc.?
I think one thing that you pointed out just in what you were saying is that it is not something that is an afterthought. It can't be something that is an afterthought. So when policy is created for each new state, each, every component, my opinion and what we can mention in the book too is that it has to be part of the DNA of anything that we're starting. Like it should start there and not be something that is added in later. We have seen a lot of many programs that have had good intentions but not really worked.
Hmm.
But I would rather have that than not have anything, because it can't be something that is thought of that, oh, we'll slot this in when it makes sense, because it's
Right,
never going to make sense. It
right.
just doesn't. For if you're really thinking of it in just like solely the business context. So that's a really important aspect that I think people need to continue to push for. And we've seen that a lot more, but it's still, before some of these programs actually have any kind of impact, I think it will take them 5 to 7 years and lots of different iterations, but you have to start iterating at the very beginning. And I think also the questions around, what purpose do you want to serve? Is it we want to give people the opportunity to thrive in the industry as they rightfully should? Is it that we want to take income generated from the industry and invest it back into the communities who have been harmed, invest it back into communities more broadly? So I think more clearly defining that and aligning those. What we've seen is debates around, you want to take the tax revenue and invest it into police forces. Well, that doesn't work. That has actually the opposite effect of what you would hope is going to
Hmm.
happen in the space. So making sure that's something that is like truly aligned with that equity component, as opposed to just another way to allocate a tax deficit that every state is experiencing.
Yeah, and sometimes, or at least in our state, some of the best efforts in equity are going on with the tribal nations, right? Because instead of just a few um, lucky individuals to get a license, it's the entire community that gets to benefit. The money's going to the community and not just to a few investors. Um, when it comes to this issue, though, I think before you can become passionate about it, you got to know that it's an issue, right? You got to understand why it's important. And I think your book does such a nice job of that, of pointing out, hey, this is what's going on. This is what's been going on. Um, you can't work in this space and not be aware of this. Have you found? Let me just ask very basically, how important do you find education is in the work that you do?
Education is top. You have to keep educating yourself, and it's not static by any means, and still being developed. We're still learning and making things up as we go along. So I think education has to always be at the forefront for anybody in any part of this industry.
So some people might say, but look, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not wealthy, I'm not connected, I'm not a politician. I can only do so much. What would you say to people like that who say, hey, I care, I'm just not in a position to influence?
Well, I am all of those things as well. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not wealthy. I don't have this massive network or all these investors that I know who I can point in different directions. I'm not a policymaker. I came into it really with the mindset that this was something that I really cared about, that I thought could help so many people. And I had the benefit of the time is that I was coming out of an MBA program, and so that is a opportune time for you to make life changes and start something different. So I had the benefit of that, but it's not like I knew anything that I was doing. It's not like I had a blueprint to say, okay, this is how you build a cannabis business. And that was the part that was interesting to me. So I think for me, I had this entrepreneurial spirit that could kind of roll with the punches. But if you to have impact, there's so many different ways that you can do it. I'm on the board of Last Prisoner Project. I'm not a policymaker. I'm not a lawyer, uh, but I've been able to help the organization by connections, by helping them think about strategy. And so it's really about, what are you good at? What are you good at, and what are you really interested in? And which one of those things can you just start going towards? It's really
Mhm.
about that. I mean, I think that there's there are very, very few skill sets that are not needed in the cannabis industry. I can't even think of the ones that aren't
Right.
needed, because there's so much that you can do. Anything from something that's more, working as a trimmer, to being an executive at a multinational organization. Like, there's so many different talents that are needed, and I won't underestimate one over the other. Like, if we don't have people who know how to grow the plant and how to produce and how to do everything at a certain level, then nothing else matters. And if we don't have people who can come in and be creative and think about, how do we uh, present this to different consumer groups, also work with regulators, and create different policies and keep working on those policies, because they're never right the first time around. It's just, there's just so many opportunities, I think. And I think what you'll find is, for people like me who've been in the space for quite some time, we've never done the same thing over and over.
Mhm.
You get into one opportunity, maybe it's not the thing that you exactly what you want to do, but you'll learn something, and then you'll be able to take that to the next. So I think it's all about just kind of going in with that continued wonder
Mhm.
that you want to be in the space, and then finding your path along the way. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Thank you. And because some people don't recognize what a roller coaster ride, your answer was really rich. So the idea of a roller coaster ride, needing to be flexible, but we hope, like the plant, that the wind and the challenges make our roots stronger, right? Make us more resilient, help us to be a stronger plant, or in this case, a person, be able to affect the industry. You talked a little bit about Last Prisoner Project, who we're very pleased to be partnered with to offer scholarships to formerly incarcerated people. But not everybody's as familiar with Last Prisoner Project. Could you talk a little bit about your role there and some of the work you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Last Prisoner Project is a national, nonpartisan nonprofit that is dedicated to cannabis criminal justice reform. It was founded in 2019. So kind of a young organization still, but one that's had a lot of impact. And the view really was that, if now that there are people who can profit and build wealth in the legal cannabis industry, all those people who are sitting in jails for crimes that are now no longer crimes, or were sentenced to time in prison for what are kind of unjust policies, not kind of, they are unjust policies, who are suffering, that they should be out of prison. And so, through legal intervention, constituent support, advocacy campaigns, policy change, Last Prisoner Project works across all of those to try to get people out of prison, to also allow for them to reintegrate into society, be it in the cannabis industry or elsewhere, and really focus on repairing the harms of the war on drugs, particularly against Black and Brown populations.
And thanks.
I've been, a, yeah, I was just going to say, I've been a board member since 2020, so have really been with the organization for uh, kind of since their early days, and it's been exciting to see how much growth has happened. It's also devastating to see how much work there is to do, because
Mhm.
it's a complicated process. It's really tough work that this team does, and I'm really proud to get to watch them do what they do.
And thank you all for having that focus, because we know often in the media the story is how many billions of dollars is the industry worth, how many jobs are being created, how much wealth is being created, and as other folks have pointed out, some folks are making life savings while other people are serving life sentences, and that can't be the case, or it can't
Mm-hmm.
continue to be the case. It is the case. The We know arrests have gone down, right, from since 2014 nationally, according to the National Crime Labor Statistics, have gone down from about 500,000 arrests to close to half of that in the last few years. But we know, and that's for simple possession, but we know the rates of arrest, like you said, for Black and Brown people are much higher. Even, you know, the entry level to the criminal justice system is not level, and that in some
Yep.
places, you could be 8 times more likely to be arrested as a brown or black person for the same offense, even though white people and black and brown people all consume cannabis at roughly the same rate. So it's not that's not that's not the driving force. So we think it's important for folks to keep that in mind. Like you say, once the law is passed, the work is not done. These laws are the rules don't always work, the laws don't always work, and so we hope if you're in a place that has legal cannabis, please don't think the fight is over. It is far from over. And sometimes well-meaning people just get it wrong, or the politicians they've never done this before. So until we see something in its imperfect state, we don't know what needs to be cleaned up. Um, how has the work that you're doing at Last Prisoner, or the work that Last Prisoner Project is doing, shifted over that period of time? Because I imagine, just like the industry, your focus or intention has changed slightly toward the main goal of releasing all cannabis prisoners.
Yeah, it's been a mix of activity. I think that, on one side there is the release program, which one thing that even I didn't realize is how many resources it takes to get one person to even get a retrial or some type of a hearing who's sitting in prison versus trying to get them out. And it is not one system across the country. It is state by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And so the man hours, woman hours that are required to do that is it's very hard to scale. And so one thing that Last Prisoner Project has started to focus much more on is the policy side and policy change and advocacy, because if they can help create better opportunities for when these adjustments are made, then that could lessen the efforts that it takes to get people out of prison. Right now it's not a massive team. It is a nonprofit, so it's not working with this massive budget to get all these different lawyers involved. We do have excellent lawyers who are on the team and work with a lot of pro bono groups at major law firms. But it's a time intensive process. So I think they've really been smart about thinking about how do we start kind of at the bottom
Mhm.
as something that can scale more and that could hopefully help the efforts as we move further down. So as states are legalizing, as they're adjusting, when you look at a state like right now, the state of Ohio, that has now passed adult use, but there's pushback in some of the policy. There are adjustments that can be made. So they're very active in those discussions, engaging there and doing that in states that are really critical to get some of these movements going. And then, of course, looking at what's happening at the federal level, because if there is an opportunity to influence federal that can then push states in a certain direction, that's going to be really important as well. Right now, because it's not federally legal, and we're only dealing on a state by state basis, you can imagine the patchwork of legal systems that they have to really master. So that's where the focus has been, in hopes that over time we can then scale again the constituent support and other types of legal intervention campaigns alongside these two groups, these efforts that they're making.
And I do want to give a shout out to Uncle Ike's, who I know participates in I think it's called Rounded Up program for
Yeah.
Last Prisoner Project. And so that's a program that if you shop at even if you don't work at a store, you all, and you have a favorite store, talk to the owners, talk to the influencers in that space. Say, hey, do you know that Last Prisoner Project exists, and do you know you can participate in this program for no cost to you? And it's a program where if I make a purchase of $25.25, they round it up, and the 75 cents, the extra rounded up to the next buck, goes to Last Prisoner Project. And I know Ike's has been participating in that for years now. And so if you have a dispensary in your area that you go to, let them know about that. They might just not know. And it's relatively easy, I imagine, to get started. So I do want to put that plug in
Definitely.
there for a great program like that, where your money can be going right into this good cause. And I want to give space to folks in the room, because I know I've been dominating the conversation or leading the questions. So what questions do you all have for Tahira? If you don't, I got more, but anyone? Well, think on it because I'm going to keep going then. Um, you mentioned a lot of people, or you mentioned finding your space in the industry, and that you were one of those people. You said, "Hey, what I wasn't sure exactly how you were going to go about it, but it was uh, a point in life where you get to change directions." We know that some brands are not values aligned with our values. You know, some brands are can feel like a fraternity, right? Can feel very much like a good old boys club and just be white guys or just be men or not reflect the spirit of the plant, I'll say. What would you
Mhm.
say? Do you have any advice to somebody who's looking for a space who says, I've tried working for a couple businesses and we just don't vibe. Like my values and the values of this company just don't align. And I want to work for somebody who I feel good about working. Some people feel like they have to compromise to get into cannabis, right?
Mhm.
What advice or what words of wisdom would you have for folks like that?
I think that there are probably two approaches that you can take, and it just depends on where your comfort level is. What I learned early days in my own experience was that I wasn't values aligned with people that I was working for, and you know was already in the industry. So then from there I had so much more information, so much more experience, connectivity, that it then allowed me to go on and make decisions that I think were better suited for me. So that there is an approach to it, is that if you're not in the industry and looking to get in, sometimes that first step is just something to be eyes wide open about. That maybe you don't vibe with them, maybe it's not the exact right fit, but is it more important to get into the industry and then start making moves from there? Or is it more important to you to find that right spot? And there's no wrong answer. I didn't know that I wasn't going to be values aligned with them until I was in the company. And so sometimes it's also hard to judge. So I encourage people to just be really open and honest on, what are your top priorities, because that at the end of the day is all that matters. You will unfortunately always find groups in whatever industry that you're in that aren't going to necessarily align in certain aspects. And so for me, it came down to prioritizing, well, what is it that's most important to me now, and then what am I working towards? I think on the other side of that, if you're really focused on making sure that it's something that is like that right fit for you, or fits the world that you want to have today, then spend time in the networking groups, talking to people, really trying to get to know them. It's one of those things. It's just hard to know until you're actually in a company what really happens, which we wish we had all that information. And so sometimes it's just trying to talk to more people who are in those organizations or are no longer at the organizations. And I think being a bit probably bold in reaching out to people, which is okay, because one thing about the cannabis industry is that everybody loves to talk, because they love the topic, they're
Hmm.
interested, or they have stories to tell. And so I think that that's something that should be taken advantage of for sure. And I had to take my own advice at some point too, where I was really shy about asking people, but you talk to one person, you talk to another, and then the world opens up. So I think that just don't be too shy.
And that was a rich answer and multi-layered. Like going back to sometimes you don't know right till you get inside, because when you're applying for a job, they won't tell you what's broken about their company. They won't tell you what's hard to stomach. They're going to tell you all the good stuff. They're going to give you a marketing message. Um, on the flip side, don't feel like you don't deserve a seat at the table, right? Even if you're cannabis naive a little bit, do your best to have the language to go in, have a grasp of what's going on. What are some of the challenges? Like you said, networking with a local professional organization. I, of course, am going to plug the Cannabis Alliance here in Washington State, but they're local professional organizations where you can just go to a meeting and just show up and know nobody. And that's the way I also started. Go in with a lot of questions and be interested in what are the lessons people have learned. And then when you get a job, get paid. That's the other thing. Sometimes people are so excited about getting into this industry that they're willing to work on a promise. And I've been there too. They're like, hey, when this money comes through, we're going to take care of you. When this happens, when we get to a certain point, we're going to take care of everybody. Get taken care of for all the work that you do. Doesn't mean um, I'm not saying to be greedy, but get compensated. Your work is your time is valuable, and even if you're a rookie in this space, everybody needs help. And so think about the transferable skills like we talked about. Tafari, I didn't see your hand up. Sorry about
Hi,
that.
can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, no worries. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Tahira. I'm Tafari.
Hi.
Similar vibe with our
Sorry.
names. And unfortunately, I missed the first half of of your your talk. So if I'm gonna ask a repetitive question, excuse me.
No worries.
So my question, and also thank you for all the work that you're doing with Last President Project. I think that's amazing. I think that such important work that we have everyone liberated in this industry now where people get to profit. So, really inspiring work. I wanted to ask you, so since you work with like Highland Venture Partners or a partner there, um, I wanted to ask around, funding. I'm interested in starting a cannabis beverage brand. And so, what would you have as tips to, really come off strong and effectively when, approaching investors and then maybe perhaps having like an investor meeting? What are some
Mhm.
things that you think will really help you stand out and help them give us their dollars? Because I know that everyone's right now a little bit sometimes on edge with, giving cannabis money. So how do you really sell them in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the product and you as the entrepreneur, the person behind it, right? So when investors are looking at anything, it's either the product that's and the problem that's being addressed, or they're investing in the person who is leading those efforts. So you think about, what is your presentation, what is the value proposition that you are bringing to that meeting, but then also because you want to make a physical product, a beverage, make sure you have a great MVP product, your minimum viable product. It doesn't have to be perfect. Don't wait till it's perfect, because perfect is the enemy of good, but get in there with something that resonates with people. And I think the best thing that you could do too, before even having those investor conversations, is trial and error and getting to a good point with your own community of people. Like, get that raw feedback, get what they like, what they don't like, get it to a point where you know that there's a base of people, doesn't matter that they're your friends and family, but that they like the product. Because as entrepreneurs, and I'm somebody who's created my own products as well, it's like sometimes we have our own blinders on because we're like, this is amazing, and people are like, it's kind of like can, and you want to be able to
Mm,
think about, well, what's going to make you stand out, and why, particularly like for your product or for anybody who's thinking about something that might already exist in that category, what what truly makes you different? Because we're at a stage now, even like beverage isn't that old, and quite frankly, good beverage is not that old at all. There's still a lot of iteration happening there, but it is becoming, from an investment standpoint, crowded because there isn't that scalability opportunity yet, until you can cross state lines and all of that. But how is yours going to stand out in certain markets, or is it a market that maybe doesn't have a product right now, right? Is it a state or a region? So just think about all those aspects on, if somebody was coming to you asking you for your money, what would it entice you, and kind of flip the table to ask yourself those types of questions.
got it. Awesome. Thank you so
And
much.
if you ever want feedback or anything like that, I'm always happy to offer and give some guidance there. So anyway, I can be helpful,
Appreciate that. Thank you.
of
And
course.
and I would also consider food scientists, right? Make sure you're engaging experts in the field who've done this. We had products in Washington State, and Tahira, you might remember, some of the first beverages were exploding on shelves because they didn't have their
Yeah.
carbonation right, or the oils, the cannabis oils would separate. So somebody like Harold Hahn, the Happy Chemist out of California, is an emulsion wonder child and has done great stuff. So making sure you work with some of those folks so your trial and error is not tremendously expensive too, you know. Good luck. Paul, what's up?
Yeah, I'm Paul Jackson. I'm a licensed carried cannabis patient for Washington State, and I lived in Seattle when Uncle Ike's opened up. And when it opened up, he did some, I think, some unscrupulous things. He opened up, you could touch his building and a church right there at the corner at the same time. I thought that was really weird. And the fuss of the fact he opened at 23rd and Union. So historically, even though I moved to Seattle in '98, I understood that 23rd and Union was the spot to go if you needed any kind of drug. And here's the guy that comes there, and now he's opened up a shop, and he's making like $1 million a week. It didn't really make any sense to me. So I'm hearing you guys praising Uncle Ike, but on the other hand, I'm thinking I don't really trust him. So, but I'm not living in Seattle anymore, and I don't really know the history, but that's what I'm going by. And I got a friend that's online, Walter Terry, who actually did time. And so I don't know if he wants to join in the discussion, but he had a company, had a customer, and you sent cannabis across state lines to a place that was legal. And the person that told him that was an informant. And so he had to do some time. But because of the population that Walter knew, he kind of exposed a lot of the trafficking that was going on and things like that. And so his sentence was reduced. He's released now. He started a nonprofit, and he's trying to raise up enough money that he can maybe sue all those that are responsible. But I don't want, put everything.
Thank you, Paul. Let me just speak briefly on that location. I was born and raised in Central District of Seattle. I'm 65 years old. What he's saying is very true. It was the place where you would go to transport to Black people. That's very offensive to us because what he's saying is true. And I'm kind of representing that fact. I had to serve time for doing marijuana, which was legal in Seattle at the time I did it. But I had federal agents had me ship it to them in Idaho, claiming that they were running a dispensary in Spokane. So they just set me up to steal $2 million from me. So I've written a thesis about why drugs should not be criminalized. And I hope you guys go to Nat Turner Revolution and read the thesis. And I'm producing a video starting next week. I'm trying to get Biz to produce a video that kind of explains in a humorous way why criminalization is so detrimental to society, criminalizing drugs. That I use a composite character, I call him Gangster X. And he represents all illegal activity. Then I have another character called White Boy Bro, who represents the white people that never get caught. And they're discussing why they're supporting the president of the United States. I haven't picked out which president candidate because he's going to make sure drugs stay illegal. Otherwise, we'll be out of business as criminals because we won't have anybody to sell to. And that's the basis of the thesis. And I'm going to be broadcasting that hopefully shortly. So that's why I'm in the cannabis business too, by trying some way to get our money back. But what I had suggested is that people who have been affected by it, they should set aside 25% of the business for us, meaning we get to control the grow, the processing, and the retailing within one company and control it from the ground to the
I'm listening to a conversation about cannabis. This is a Sesh session. No, I'm fine. Thanks. Okay.
So I don't want to take any more. I don't want to take any more time, but that's where I'm coming from. That's why I invited Dion and Paul. We're trying to organize as African Americans that policy inside the state. That's why he's asked me to come and speak, and she knew that you would be speaking. She's speaking exactly what I'm so glad to hear what you had to say. It's just so right on point to where I'm coming from anyway. So,
and Walter, thanks for not being bitter. Thanks for coming out and getting out and taking action after that whole ordeal. That's the difference. And I encourage you to look up Last Prisoner Project and the work that they're doing.
I'm pretty familiar with it.
Oh, great. Okay, awesome.
Pretty familiar with
awesome.
It. Just because
and I will.
I was in prison. Right.
Gotcha.
Trying to get out.
And I do want to stand up for the employees at Ike's who are on today, and a lot of good folks doing a lot of good work. I know politics, and there was, as things opened, there was a lot of discussion, but people can grow, people can change, and have good impact in this community. Of course, we all have the opportunity to spend our money where we choose, right? And I would always encourage everybody to pay attention to the brands, right? Not just the retail store, but the brands that you're buying, and ask the question, is this a company I want to give my money to? That's where we all have power, just like our vote, right? We're voting with our dollars. So we hope that you're not just buying the cheapest bud off the shelf, but really paying attention. Hey, what does this brand care about me? I know a couple people mentioned dogs. You know, Soulshine here in Washington State donates a portion of their products to rescue animals. So, you know, does this company do things that I'm, like we talked about, values aligned with? What other questions might you all have for Tahira? Tahira, let me ask you, not everybody's had the opportunity to read your book. What's the one takeaway you would like people to walk away with today? I know not everybody was with us at the beginning, and I know we haven't covered nearly the breadth of your knowledge when it comes to this subject. But if folks didn't catch it all, or we didn't get to everything you'd like to talk about, is there one thing you would like to know that people walked away thinking a little bit more about?
Well, drilling it down into one sentence, I'll do my best, or to one point. You know, the main points that we try to articulate is one, you know, and for this audience, we all know this: cannabis legalization is here, but now it's really about what do we do with it. It's going to continue that way, and it's up to us as the larger community, not just to the business people or just the policymakers. It's about everybody getting engaged to make sure that it goes in the right direction and it continues to go in the right direction. And goes back to your question earlier, Trey, about, well, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not wealthy, how do I get involved? Your voice is probably the most important asset that you have. That was a big point of why Akwasi and I wanted to write this book. It's how do we use our voices to get other people engaged, because we can't, as an individual or as two people, we can't make the change. But all of us together can, and we're very confident about that. The other part is that, you know, we touched on this earlier as well, is that policies have to be part of the DNA of any program. And again, it comes back to us being involved and engaged and understanding when there are public comment periods for every time that there's a policy that's potentially going into effect. So I would say, just never discount the value of your own voice, of the people around you, engaging with them. That's always going to have a massive impact, and people need to know, you know, and maybe it doesn't have that impact right away, but it builds over time. One thing that Akwasi and I always say is that, yes, we agree that cannabis is a gateway drug, but we believe that it's a gateway to the criminal justice system, not to the drug system. And so how do we change that? That's the overarching thing, is how do we change that? Because it should not be that way. Cannabis should not be illegal in any way, shape, or form. People should not be suffering for it. People should not be in jail for it. And people who have been impacted negatively from it should be at the very front of the line to now benefit from it. So what do we do about that? And it's a big, open-ended, hairy question. And that's what we position in the book. But we also wanted to just share stories that we have learned along the way, I think, to further illustrate what has happened and how there are glimmers of hope that are popping up in different places across the country that are showing the impact. There can be positive impact, but it's going to take work. So not just one bullet, that's the best summary I can give, but I appreciate you letting me throw a little bit of that in there.
No, absolutely. And we want to also encourage you all to light small fires, right? No one of us can get all this work done, but we can have an effect on the way our family and our friends see the issue, or even know about the issue, right? Or paying attention to the issue. Once again, waiting to inhale, cannabis legalization and the fight for racial justice. Tahira, do you mind talking a little bit about Akwasi? Akwasi, he wasn't here today, and I know we just talked about you, but could you just introduce us very briefly to your co-author?
Of course. So Akwasi Owusu-Bempah, he is a professor at the University of Toronto. He has studied race criminalization, the intersection for many years. His work continues in that. He's written other academic books as well. He's actually going to be co-authoring a book around the change in policing in Northern America coming soon. And so he has been really focused on not just cannabis specifically, but more broadly how race and criminal justice kind of butt heads with each other. It's also done a great amount of work looking at other substances like psychedelics and the criminalization and the impact of those. So wealth of knowledge. I always joke that he's the brains. I just talk. But I'm the business side. He's actually the brain side. But yeah, it was a great opportunity to write this with him because we're able to bring in two different sides. So I've been much more, in business opportunities, and Akwasi has been much more research focused. So bringing those two sides together, the best way that we could do that was through sharing other people's stories and Waiting to Inhale, and like how both the business and the policy failed them.
Thank you very much. And you all pick up a copy of this book. It is readily available, whether through Amazon or better yet, a small independent bookstore near you, locally owned. But pick up a copy. It's accessible. It's full of very detailed personal stories about what's going on, help make this issue, put faces with the issue and help you understand why this is an issue about all of us, not just some of us. Thank you again for your time. We are at time. Try to cut these right at time to honor your time and the time of our guest. So we are going to close for now, but if anybody wants to hang back, you're welcome to do that. Thank you very much for being here today for Saturday Sesh, and we appreciate you all.